Okay, let's get into this. We're diving into, well, a really challenging situation today. We're focusing on these incidents near aid distribution points down in Rafah in southern Gaza.
Yeah, and the source we're working from is a pretty detailed BBC News report. It covers recent events, but also, crucially, lays out some really conflicting stories about what actually happened.
Exactly. So, our mission here is to sort of unpack this source material for you. We want to pull out the key info, look at the different viewpoints.
And really understand the background, the context around aid delivery there. It's tough. The goal is to give you a clearer picture, based strictly on what this BBC report says.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Based on the source, we're talking Rafah, southern Gaza, an area the report notes is now under full Israeli military control.
Right. And you've got thousands and thousands of people gathering. They're described as desperate. I mean, in dire need of basics, food, medicine. They've gone weeks, maybe longer, without reliable supplies.
And the report explains why they show up so early, doesn't it? Hours before aid is even meant to arrive.
It does. It's pure desperation driving it. They get there super early, sometimes waiting all night, just to better their chances of getting something, anything.
Yeah.
Because the reality is there's nowhere near enough aid for everyone who needs it.
So if you're late.
You likely get nothing. It's gone. So that pushing forward, the report suggests, while risky, it's understandable given how desperate people are.
Makes tragic sense. Okay, so let's look at the specific incident reported on today in the source material. Reports started coming out about people killed, injured, near an aid center.
Yeah, near one of these distribution centers in Rafah.
And the accounts from local sources cited by the BBC, they sound pretty clear-cut from their perspective.
They do. The Hamas-run health ministry
Yeah.
reported at least 27 killed, 90 injured, people just waiting for aid, some critically hurt.
Wow. And Gaza's Civil Defense Agency, did they add more?
They did. They specifically said Israeli forces opened fire on Palestinians waiting for access, and they gave details saying most casualties were from tank fire, helicopters, even quadcopter drones.
Drones, too.
Yeah. And crucially, they placed the incident hundreds of meters before the actual aid center, near the Alam roundabout. They estimate that roundabout is about 1 kilometers away from the specific aid center run by the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation.
Okay, so quite a distance potentially. What about hospitals?
The director of Nasser Hospital, that's nearby Khan Yunis, he reported receiving casualties. He said 24 killed, 37 wounded arrived. And he's quoted saying most had gunshot wounds as a result of Israeli forces opening fire on crowds of civilians. Direct quote there from the report.
And eyewitnesses, correspondents.
The source mentions reports from them, too, saying they saw Israeli forces using excessive force against unarmed civilians. There's also a quote from a foreign medic working there who described just total carnage. He said they were overwhelmed with casualties from early in the morning.
Okay, so that's a very stark picture from the local sources cited. What about the Israeli military, the IDF, and the GHF distributing the aid? What's their side of the story in this report?
Well, it's a very different narrative. The IDF states its troops did fire shots, but only after identifying what they called suspects. And they placed these suspects about half kilometer, 0.5 kilometers from an aid site.
Okay, half a kilometer. And did they just open fire?
No, they emphasize they used warning fire first. They say only when the suspects failed to retreat did they direct additional shots near a few individual suspects who advanced toward the troops. They also noted they are aware of the casualty reports and are looking into it.
Right, and the GHF, the actual aid distributors at that specific spot.
Their statement, as reported, claims that aid distribution at their site that day was conducted safely and without incident.
Without incident at their site. Okay, so how do they explain the casualties?
They suggest people might have been injured after moving beyond the designated safe corridor, moving into what they termed a closed military zone, a zone they say was well beyond their secure site. Their advice was clear: stay in the safe corridor.
Okay, let me just pause there, because the difference is huge, isn't it?
It really is. You have local sources talking about a mass casualty event, civilians fired on by Israeli forces possibly hundreds of meters away from the specific GHF center. Then you have the IDF talking about limited fire on suspects half a kilometer away, starting with warnings.
And the GHF saying their own site was fine, implying any trouble was much further out in a military zone.
Exactly. The accounts clash on almost everything: who was shot, why, and crucially, where it happened relative to the aid distribution point.
And the BBC report suggests this isn't a one-off incident, right? It mentions something similar happening just days before.
That's right. On the Sunday before, apparently at roughly the same location.
And I assume the stories clash there, too.
just as sharply. For that Sunday incident, the Hamas-run Health Ministry and Gaza's Civil Defense Agency reported 31 killed, nearly 200 injured.
Hmm.
Again, they attributed it to Israeli gunfire targeting civilians.
Okay. Any other reports from Sunday?
Yeah, an ICRC hospital in Rafah reported a mass casualty influx then, too. Said 21 people were declared dead upon arrival.
Hmm. And the report notes we don't know if that 21 is part of the 31 count or separate.
Exactly. The source says that's unclear.
And the IDF response for Sunday, similar to the later incident.
Very similar pattern. They denied firing at people near or within the aid center itself, but they did acknowledge soldiers firing warning shots, again at what they called suspects who were approaching them.
And the GHF for Sunday.
They also denied claims of injuries or casualties at their site for Sunday. They actually stated those claims were spread by Hamas, according to the report.
Wow. So denial from GHF, IDF acknowledging warning shots at suspects far off, local sources reporting mass casualties from direct fire near the aid area.
Precisely. And the source even mentions another incident briefly from Monday. Health officials and local media reporting 3 more Palestinians killed by Israeli fire near the same GHF center.
And the Israeli military response for Monday? Let me guess.
You guessed it. Warning shots were fired towards several suspects who advanced toward troops, this time about 1 kilometer from the site, according to their statement in the report.
So it's this recurring cycle reported across several days, tragic casualty reports near aid points.
Met with IDF accounts of warning shots at distant suspects and GHF denials of issues at their specific location.
Let's pull back a bit then and look at the bigger picture the source provides. This GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, seems important here.
It definitely is. The report describes it as a newly created body, and it's backed by the U.S. and Israel.
Ah, okay. And why was it set up?
Explicitly as an alternative way to get aid in, bypassing the UN. The report mentions Israel's reasoning was needing an alternative to stop Hamas from potentially stealing aid delivered through UN channels.
So that shift in who's delivering the aid, that's a key piece of context.
A very significant detail, yes.
The source also brings in a UN perspective from the human rights chief, Volker Turk. His comments sound quite strong.
Extremely strong. He called the way aid is being delivered dehumanizing and unacceptable. Powerful words.
Dehumanizing. Wow. What else did he say?
He said it showed an utter disregard for civilians. Civilians who are just desperate for food and medicine. He painted a picture of people having to run for it, trying to get aid in the most desperate circumstances.
So his focus wasn't just on these specific incidents, but the whole system.
Exactly. He called for a rethinking of the entire current system. It really underscores the human cost and the systemic problems, regardless of who fired what where in these specific clashes.
And the BBC report itself points out other sort of structural problems too, right? Beyond the immediate security incidents.
It does, like the practical issue that even if people get aid parcels, many lack fuel or facilities to actually cook the food.
Right, that makes sense.
And the basic structural problem of having maybe only 1 or 2 places where thousands upon thousands of desperate people have to congregate to get help. That creates a bottleneck, a potentially dangerous situation in itself.
Yeah, you can see how that setup could be inherently risky.
Definitely. So you connect these dots from the report. The sheer need, not enough aid, these contested distribution points, the shift away from the UN via GHF, the security incidents with totally different stories, it really paints a picture of a chaotic and deeply flawed system for getting essentials to people in a war zone.
And layered on top of all that is the challenge of figuring out the truth. The report mentions verification issues.
A critical point.
Yeah.
The BBC notes that Israel doesn't allow international news organizations, including the BBC itself, into Gaza independently.
So no independent journalists on the ground to verify these competing claims.
Exactly. Which makes it incredibly difficult for anyone outside to really nail down what's happening. It fuels the confusion when you have such wildly different accounts coming from the different parties involved.
Okay, so if we try to boil it down, pulling everything together from this BBC report, what's the core situation it presents?
You've got multiple incidents reported over several days near aid distribution points in Rafah. These have resulted in tragic loss of life and many injuries. That seems clear.
But the how and why are contested.
Massively. You have starkly different stories. Local authorities, medics, eyewitnesses cited are describing civilians being fired upon by Israeli forces, potentially quite far from the specific GHF site. Then you have the Israeli military describing limited firing only on suspects, often at a distance, starting with warnings. and the GHF insisting its own distribution point was safe and secure.
Right. And all this is happening against that backdrop we discussed.
Exactly. Overwhelming humanitarian need, this new contested aid delivery system bypassing the UN, strong criticism from figures like the UN Human Rights Chief about the whole approach being dehumanizing, plus those underlying structural issues with distribution, and crucially, the difficulty for outsiders to verify anything due to restricted access.
It really is a complex, tragic, and frankly confusing picture based on what the sources lay out.
It is, and it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Thinking about
Yeah.
that fundamental challenge drawn right from this context. I mean, just consider how incredibly hard it must be to deliver essential aid safely in an active war zone like this.
Where you have such desperation driving people towards dangerous areas.
And at the same time, security concerns leading military forces to take actions that then result in these completely conflicting stories about what happened.
So the final thought, perhaps, is what does this whole situation, as the sources describe it, really tell us about the fundamental, maybe even intractable difficulties of protecting civilians and getting them basic necessities when conflict is raging?
Yeah, something to definitely mull over.